so I'm going to assume we all know who Godzilla is, and by extent, King Kong. So I won't bore you with a whole intro on their history or significance or why I find them cool or whatever. Instead, I'm going to go straight to the point, my thoughts on this movie, Monkey and Big Lizard, plus friends. Viddy? There's already 1,000 other reviews for this movie. Yeah, well, did you even read the title? I'm a fan. I've spent most of my life as an admirer of these types of movies. For that reason, I feel my thoughts might be worth hearing out, even if some of my points will be stated by others 10 times over. I also think this intro is long enough to be called an intro, so let's just get to the... I enjoyed the environment of the Hollow Earth a lot more this time than I did in 2021's Godzilla vs. Kong. Instead of just miles and miles of lush jungle and cliffs, we got rocky canyons and almost fluorescent hills? I'm already having trouble remembering that part, but I think that's what I saw. Anyway, outside of the Hollow Earth, I thought locations like Italy and Egypt were fun places to see giant monsters in, and I think it's an integral part of any kaiju movie to include well-known landmarks as to illustrate just how big these monsters are. Though I will counter this compliment later in the cons section, as landmarks aren't the only thing needed in these films. A very popular argument within the kaiju genre is the balance between everything else and the monsters. I've seen charts and posts documenting this online, either with percentages or just straight minutes on screen. Godzilla's longest appearance on screen is in the film Godzilla vs. Mechagodzilla from 1993, often titled Godzilla vs. Mechagodzilla 2. For the last decade, since Godzilla 2014, there's been an overwhelming push for monster screen time without anything being cut away for the sake of time or story. Out of all of the MonsterVerse series, this film has done that to the fullest, giving us a complete final battle without any human intervention. That combined with entire sequences with the same effect, you got a film that does not pull back on monster action, which is something even myself can appreciate. Mothra! A fan favorite not only from her debut MonsterVerse film in 2019, but also as one of the Big Five. Mothra's presence in this movie was very enjoyable, not only to see, but also hear as she is built up throughout the movie until her rebirth towards the end. Her design hasn't been altered very much from 2019, perhaps only in the color palette as she has less blues and more yellows this time around. I'm not a huge fan of her being this specific weakness to Godzilla's wrath, as I preferred her portrayal when she's against Godzilla in previous movies, so I think I'll avoid commenting on her character entirely. If you liked her characterization in 2019, you will be happy to see that nothing's really changed. Of the human characters in this film, there are only a few that I really liked. I know for a lot of people going to see these movies, the humans aren't what they're going to see it for, but for me, they are as important to the movies as the kaiju themselves. So I'll continue. The mother-daughter relationship from the last movie carries on into this one with Rebecca Hall's character Irene and Kylie Hoddle's Gia. Without a doubt, they were the highlight for the human cast, as they were with the last one. The parallel of Gia and Kong's character was nice to see, as they both started the movie without their kind, and ended up with their kind. I do think they had more room this time without the subplot with Millie Bobby Brown's character, though I think there probably could have been even more growth that could have been done, but I understand why, as no one apparently cares about the people in these movies. Speaking of Kong, he is King Kong after all, so I didn't really expect for him not to have some kind of character journey. Nothing really to write home about, but I liked it. He's got a son now, and a big dog. Lastly, I would like to take note of Bernie, played by Brian Tyree Henry. The humor in these films is still clunky, but I think it's getting better with each one. Shout out to Ghidorah64, even though that's not really how you pronounce
Ghidorah. Ghidorah.
Before I can move on, I would also like to mention Monoch's presence in this film. It's not much, but seeing them reporting on Godzilla as he absorbed radiation in Italy, I think it was? I could be wrong. Was cool. I know from a writing standpoint, it's literal fluff for the audience to be let in on what's happening, but I still wanted to address it. Finally, we're at my favorite sequences. Godzilla at the power plant sucking in the energy or whatever before using his nuclear pulse on the self-defense forces was really cool, no two ways about it. We haven't seen that kind of thing since 2019. I enjoyed the whole Kong and Diddy Kong section, as long as it was. I really thought the baby was going to be saved or something, but when he bit Kong's finger, I was surprised. Then Kong uses the baby like a pillow in a pillow fight on the apes, and yeah, that was funny. Most of the stuff I liked was the funny bits, like when Baby Kong lures Kong into the water so the eel thing can kill him. The only other sequence I actually laughed at was the Egypt fight. Kong waving in Godzilla's face trying to recruit him, only to get shoved into the pyramid. And of course the suplex maneuver, something I would have seen in 1962 probably. Oh yeah, Godzilla jumped off a cliff? Here we go. This movie has inherited a flaw that more or less started with Pacific Rim Uprising, a lack of scale or any resemblance to realism. I'm not saying that it needs to be 105% realistic to reality, but some rules need to be established for the audience to take what they're watching even the slightest bit seriously. Not that this film is serious at all, but the tone of a film has nothing to do with the presentation of it. The absence of any weight to these skyscraper-sized kaijus adds to this cartoonish sense that makes all of the action a lot less impactful, almost dull even. Which is why films like Pacific Rim, Cloverfield, any Heisei Gamera film, and even super outlandish stuff like
Neon Genesis Evangelion
look so much more satisfying as monsters do all the monster things that they do. For this movie, the action doesn't have that sense of hugeness that a giant monster would be expected to have, because, you know, it's a giant monster. All that to say, this isn't the 70s anymore, where the budget constraints and the general audience excuse the same issues this movie suffers from now. Basically, it looks like someone forgot to slow down the frames, like in Godzilla Raids Again. Now, I've always had problems with American monster designs, so it isn't really surprising that I wouldn't be fond of these ones either. This is subjective, by the way. I'm merely critiquing these designs, personally, maybe offering some ways of fixing them too. Starting off with Scar King. Man, what a name. There are some parts of the design I liked, but for an intimidating villain for King Kong, he doesn't really quite do it for me. The decision to make him long and lanky is a large part of it. I know it's probably to make him that much more different compared to all of the other ape characters in the film, but it doesn't make me think of him as an especially cool villain. Though I think that was the point, which is why I'm mentioning him first and least offensive. The red fur / blue eyes combo is very catching, and I like the weird glands that kind of drip from his eyes and loop around his jaws. He has fangs, but I think making them even larger and more pointed would have been one way of improving the design. Perhaps add some scars too? From what I could tell, he doesn't really have any, if any at all. So why is he called Scar King then? Shimo! What's cooler than a giant radioactive dinosaur that spits fire? Nothing. But I'll continue. A bigger dinosaur that spits ice. Ah, brilliant work, guys. I've never seen anything like this before. In all seriousness, an ice-wielding monster, though an obvious opponent for something that basically breathes fire, works out exactly as you'd think. Opposites attract, or whatever. Her design has the groundwork for being interesting, though I think improvements could have been made beforehand. Her face looks like it was stung by a massive bee, for one, and the crystals could have been spread out to more than just the end of the tail, elbows, spine, and behind the head. I also think, though again it's a contradiction to Godzilla's design, the scale pattern could have been more similar to the spikes, jutting out in a sporadic way and overall making her look more aggressive. Personally, these changes might have boosted the character's softer personality that is being forced to be a monster, both as a character and physically. Of all the things to compliment on Shimo's design, though, it would have been the fluorescent scales that change color as she moves. Next is the big guy himself, Godzilla. As if to add to the laundry list of critiques I have on this design, now he's pink, has these shark-like bent dorsal plates, smaller teeth, and a... What is that? What is this? The skinny aspect, even if given a reason to exist in the movie's plot, makes the rest of the design look strange and out of place. The proportions have been thrown all over, making parts like the legs and arms seem too heavy to even move, heavily dependent on the shot of course. For the list I mentioned, ever since 2014's Godzilla movie, there's been a new problem with this design for every movie. Head's too blocky, tail's too short, not spiky enough, now this new design. I really miss the slanted toes and the slate-like dorsal plates. The only main design I haven't made note of is Kong, who for the most part is fine. They made him slightly more scraggly and bushy than last time, and instead of brown, he looks more gray. For what the filmmakers want with him, I think he works fine. I still prefer the 2005 design, though. As I am in the design section of this video, I should mention sound design, which for everything aside from the monsters, is great. I think we've come to a place in cinema history where any place can have an accurate soundscape for any location we are in a film. But the monsters, yeah, the monsters sound generic at times, especially Shimo, whose roar I could pick up hints to some stock roars that I've heard in multiple movies. When it comes to creature sound design in the Monsterverse, I always refer to the Muto pair from 2014. And these new arrivals don't hold up in comparison. I will also mention that the roars weren't nearly as loud as other Godzilla movies I've attended. Maybe that's just my theater though, so I'll leave that critique outside. I don't really know where to begin with this. As if the last movie was bad enough, this one went all in on showing as much violent maiming and gutting of monsters as possible. I get that the movie's PG-13, but this was a bit much. Ripping a hyena thing in half and soaking in the corpse's blood? Chopping up a giant eel thing and slurping out its entrails? If that sounds cool, this is the movie for you! And all of that was done under one of the silliest instances of censorship I have seen in a long time. If it's not red, it's bread. Wait, what? Apparently, the way to get around showing animals being ripped or cut into pieces is to just make the blood a different color. In this case, green. Like pesto sauce, or Jamba Juice. I know this is a thing that's common within King Kong's realm, but this seemed a bit extreme even for him. The most the 2005 film did was rip out a dinosaur's tongue. Can't wait to see Deadpool slice it to a guy in his next movie, only to see a puddle of green goo get splattered everywhere. This more or less goes with the weight and realism problem. I know that computer-generated imagery are in a way easier than using basically any other method of special effect when trying to portray such a large-scale character or the events around him. But when that is 50% of your movie, I think new or old or just any other kind of method should be considered. You can say this looks good, sure, but it looks good in the same way that this looks good. Granted, this isn't a critique of this specific movie as it is a critique of movies in general for the past 20 plus years. This doesn't look real just as much as this doesn't look real. Stop it. It's predictable. No, I can't remember any specific lines, but I swear I could think of where each conversation interaction was going as soon as it started. I know there's certain things that might need to happen for the sake of plot, but I don't know. Insert charming guy who's along for the ride for a good time, not a long time. This time played by Dan Stevens. Nothing was exactly wrong with the character, but I wasn't exactly wowed by him either. This is a good place to mention all of the pop music that was used in this movie, which is the first time in a Godzilla movie that I've had to subject myself to this movie trope. If I wanted to watch Guardians of the Galaxy, I would have. By the third or fourth time a song played as the vet guy made his dramatic entrance, I couldn't really help but laugh because it's more silly than the monsters at this point. There was also a soldier guy in this movie, as there usually is. He wasn't really a character, so as to speak, but instead a bounce pad for the other characters to argue with. Tough, no-nonsense type, you know. I knew he was dead as soon as he mentioned going to the Hollow Earth. Anyway, the Iwi tribe, which now resides in the Hollow Earth, have magic stuff this time, like crystal spears and gravity powers. They all can use telepathy as well as this prophecy that leads to the resurrection of Mothra. Wait, telepathy? Mothra? Psychic links between monster and human? Wait a minute. Yeah, that's really cool. This is a really fast section, as the last two MonsterVerse movies gave the same amount of thought to human life as this one. I don't even want to know how many people were flattened and crumbled in the final fight. I mean, just in this shot, Kong probably killed some souls who were very much in the wrong place at the wrong time. Tom Hulkenborg. aka Junkie XL, a man whose vast resume is only rivaled by his mentor, Hans Zimmer, and like Zimmer, often has little regard for character-specific themes or leitmotifs. Though in Junkie's case, he has no regard for previously established themes either. Sticking to the MonsterVerse, for now, Godzilla himself has had a new theme and composer for every movie, save for the last two. Because of this, the theme has constantly changed, a trend that has happened quite often recently. Take the superhero movies for the past 20 years. The issue here is that this is Godzilla. Godzilla! A 70-year running franchise of films that has had one composer that has stayed at the top, who has given Godzilla not only his music, but also his roar, Akira Ifukube. Without him, Godzilla wouldn't be the Godzilla we know. And while I understand that in the earlier years of both the MonsterVerse and the entire franchise, Godzilla's theme would either change often or not be the theme. Well, that's the thing, isn't it? What is the Godzilla theme?
Go up!
And why is it not in this movie, though it's been present in all of these movies? The unfortunate answer more or less comes from Mr. Hulkenborg himself. Quote, John Williams' Superman theme would not necessarily, in its original form, work in Man of Steel, because Man of Steel is a more melancholic, emotional storytelling instead of being so tongue-in-cheek. It's not that type of Superman. It's very similar with Godzilla. That music would not one-to-one work in a modern Godzilla movie, but it's the idea that counts. Unquote. For context, this is from an interview not long after the release of the Justice League Snyder Cut, which he did composition for, in which he also cut out any pre-existing theme for the characters in that movie. So it seems he's very fond of this, and I'm not, which is why it's a con to this movie review. And that's not even speaking to the theme itself, just to the idea of not using Akira Ifukube's theme. That is something that has been done numerous times to varying degrees of success.
Alexandre Desplat.
Theme for Godzilla 2014 is a great example within the MonsterVerse. Hulkenborg's theme aims to honor Akira Ifukube's theme, and by doing that, he makes a lame imitation of something that thousands of people know as Godzilla's theme. When you combine this with the entirely synthesized orchestra, a soulless concept of itself, you get an overall score that has no real worth to it aside from being a background track. But I suppose that's exactly what it is, just as mentor Zimmer always wanted. Kong has an infected tooth at the beginning of the film, so instead of trying to contact the outpost that I can't see him not knowing about down in the Hollow Earth, he climbs or flies or whatever up to the surface so the vet guy can yank it out with his spaceship. Yeah, he has a spaceship, by the way. There's little reason to do this for the plot, aside from some introduction and to establish that Godzilla will target Kong if he comes back. But that is verbally said before Kong emerges, so it all seems rather pointless? Moving on, later in the film we meet the Iwi tribe and get the exposition scene we always get. The scene itself isn't bad, but again the dialogue isn't great, and the Iwi tribe, well, they're them. The final fight! Yes, I was disappointed. I've made my point pretty well with how that would be. But to push this critique even further, Shimo and Scar King are portrayed as pretty weak against Godzilla, and Kong needs both of them against him to start losing. And then the ending of the fight is exactly as I thought it would go, without any surprising twist, or anything to make me feel any more invested. As soon as Scar King's dead, the movie pretty much ends, which is pretty sudden if you ask me. Might as well have Godzilla swim into the ocean with the human cast waving and yelling. And just like the movie, I think I'll end the video pretty quickly. I'm sorry if this was a bit of a cynical review, if that was too large of a part, but hey, you can always watch someone else's review, which is more positive than my take. If you made it this far into this very long video, please type in the comments. And let me know if you want to hear my thoughts on the other MonsterVerse films, as I'm sure I have plenty to say about them, and I haven't watched them since their release. With all that, I'll close out. Bye.